Kitty Genovese. Everyone says for over 30 minutes, 38 of her neighbors watched her get assaulted and murdered in the middle of the night, and nobody called the police. It's because, you know, people thought that the other neighbor was calling the police, or, oh, not my problem, or, oh, so many people must have seen it, so they must have done something. But that's not even what happened! That's not even what happened! You've got the police and the New York Times to blame. So Kitty Genovese, she was born in Brooklyn, New York City. Kitty was a lesbian. And this is very pertinent to the story because this was the 60s. The 60s. It sounds like it was recent and you're like, oh my god, the 60s. Like, it sounds like such a fun time. Like, we should throw like 60s parties. Well, they like hated anyone of the LGBTQ community. She moves into an apartment in Kew Gardens, which is in the Queens area. And she starts doing some odd jobs here and there. She's doing like clerical work and she's like, this is really unfulfilling. So she ends up getting a bartending job. She was living with her girlfriend at the time by the name of Mary Ann Zelenko, and they had met in 1963. They had met at a gay bar. So March 13th, 1964 was when the attack happened on Kitty Genovese, and it happened around 3 in the morning. So Kitty got into her car, her red Fiat, after she had gone off from her bartending job, right? Because it ends late, and she's driving home. So she's driving to Kew Gardens. Probably not like this, because it's in between lanes, but she's driving home, and what she didn't know is that when she was stopped at a red light, that there was another man parked in his vehicle that had seen her alone in the car, and his name was Winston Mosley, and he's a mother forker, and he sees her driving alone in her little red Fiat, stopped at this red light. She wasn't even like, she wasn't even walking on the sidewalk, like she was literally in her vehicle at a red light, and he was stalking her. So what she doesn't know is that this man proceeds to follow her home. So she parks her car and she proceeds to walk out of the parking lot. Now, at the same time, Winston Mosley gets out of his car with a hunting knife and starts briskly walking towards Kitty Genovese. Now, during this time, there were two things in New York City that were very, very odd. The first being that there was no 911.
Huh?
This was before the 911 system was implemented.
What?
So this was, like, back then, before 911, like, if you were in the middle of an emergency, if someone was stabbing you to death, you would literally have to grab your phone and call the local operator and then ask them for the police precinct number, hang up the phone, and then dial the police precinct number, and then hope that a police officer picks up the phone. Also, there weren't a lot of street lights. So this is in New York during the time where there was barely any street lights anywhere. So almost after this murder, the mayor had, like, rolled out a bunch of issues on how to put out streetlights, and there was a lot more streetlights added after this point. And so she's walking towards the building and she sees this man chasing after her with a hunting knife. So she freaking starts screaming and he stabs her and she continues to scream. Now, she screamed allegedly, oh my god, me, please help me. That's what people think that she screamed after the fact. Now, a lot of neighbors did hear this, but they didn't hear her exact words. So nobody really took major concern to this. No one was like waking up, getting out of bed, trying to call the cops. Now, there was a guy by the name of Robert Moser who had opened up his window and saw Kitty and Winston. He did not see the knife and he did not see that Kitty had been. So he had just heard the scream. Now, because there was a bar right next to the apartment complex, like a pub, he assumed that maybe this guy was from the pub and he was trying to hit on this girl and she wasn't into it. And so she was like screaming like, get away from me. And so he just screamed at Winston, hey, you leave that girl alone. And so Winston ran away. Now, some neighbors also looked out the window at this point and they see that there is a man running towards his white car, gets into the car and then leaves. So they're like, okay, like whatever, if something did happen, it's no longer happening, right? But what they didn't know is that all Winston did was drive around for about 10 minutes, repark his car, change his hat to a hat that was wide brimmed so that the shadow was covering his face more in the dark, and then he proceeded to go search for Kitty. So at this point, nobody knows that Kitty has been except for a man by the name of Robert Fink. So Robert Fink was actually the super at the building that Kitty lived in, and a super is essentially like a building manager, and he was on the clock at that point, and he saw that he clearly saw it. He had the best view out of anyone, right? He saw the stabbing and he thought to himself, should I go down into the basement and grab the bat so that I can beat up her assaulter? And then he thought to himself, it seems like a lot. And then he proceeded to take a nap on his desk. So Robert Fink is the only person that I think is like just the truly evil witness in this situation. So Winston comes back, looks all over the place. Now, Kitty at this point, she had been crawling to try to get into like the entrance of the building. Now, here's the very, very sad thing. She had been So police and medical experts believe that she could not have screamed at any volume. So she could not have screamed at help. For help. It just would have been nearly impossible. She actually finds an open door and proceeds to go in, and there was this massive stairwell, and she couldn't really proceed further. Winston finds her at like the bottom of this stairwell, and he proceeds for the next stab her more while he her and then steals $49 out of her wallet before running back into the darkness. And finally, there was one neighbor by the name of Carl. So Carl actually heard all of this happening, and his door was near the stairwell. So he had opened up his door and he had looked down and he had seen what was going on. And he went back into his apartment. He freaked out. He called two of his friends and asked them what to do, because during this time also, keep in mind that when you call the police and you are gay or a minority or a woman, they usually cause more trouble than they do help. I believe he was part of the LGBTQ community. He was not like a straight white male that had never committed a crime that the police would love.
He's scared too.
So he's scared. So what he does is he crawls out of his window and actually knocks on the neighbor's window that he's close friends with, and so is Kitty. Her name is Sophia, and she was a mom at the time, and she was alone, I believe, with her kids. And he knocks on the window, she lets her in, and he's like, Kitty's like getting down there, like, I don't know what to do. And she's like, for the love of God, call the police. So she makes him call the police from her house, and she runs down the stairwell. And at this point, thankfully, Winston had gone, but she didn't know that. So Sophia had no idea if the attacker was still there. And she found Kitty like dying at the end of the stairwell. So she knows that they're calling the police upstairs, so she pretty much just cradled Kitty until the ambulance came. The ambulance take her away, and she was pronounced dead on the way to the hospital. Now let's talk about the police calls. There are actually multiple police calls that were made. None of them are recorded, so there's not a definitive number of exactly how many police phone conversations were made to the precinct, and they were not considered high priority. They were actually considered not priority at all because they were unclear. So the person who had called was a neighbor and said, I think some dude just like this woman, I think, because she's kind of like staggering around, but he ran off and I don't know what to do. And so they were like, yeah, we'll get around to it. So they had thought maybe like a boyfriend had the girlfriend, and then now she's like probably safe because she's like home, I guess, or like can make her way inside, and the boyfriend had left. So everyone just assumed there was nothing crazy happening. Now, it has been determined that none of the witnesses saw the attack in its entirety. Now, where does the number 38 come from? Because we can tell that if you look at all of the witness statements, only about a dozen of them saw even anything. So some sources, they said that they got this number because they counted like the windows on the building that could have been facing it, and they were like, oh, that seems like, 38 windows, so 38 people. Now, another source says this one is the right one, which is the fact that they just took everyone's statement and then they counted just like all the statements, and some of the statements were just like, oh, I didn't hear anything, like I was in bed. And they're like, okay, and that was 38 people's statements. Now, immediately after this murder, there was no media attention, like nobody covered it, but the New York Times discovered, wait a minute, maybe we can make people interested. Maybe there's a story here. So they came out with this title. For over 30 minutes, 38 law-abiding citizens watched someone and a woman in Queens.
So that's where it came from. They wanted a story. This was a story. So they start questioning Mary, who is Kitty's girlfriend, and they bring her in, and two homicide detectives question her for over 6 hours. And the one thing that they wanted to focus on was not alibi, was not any of these things, but the fact that they were lesbians. They would even say, for detective purposes, for investigative purposes, what were your favorite positions? We need to know. What? Why?
I don't know, because I think they're sick and nasty. And so they came up with this theory that Mary is the killer. They're like, Mary must have done it, because here's the thing. Mary, let's be real. Kitty wasn't a lesbian. No one's actually a lesbian. How could you resist us, men like us? There's no way women would give up all of this. Am I right? Am I right, Chad? Am I right, Kevin? So they pretty much were just like, yeah, Kitty was not a lesbian. She started dating a guy because, lesbians are all just waiting for the right guy. It's not that they're not lesbian. It's that, the right guy hasn't come around. That's the problem. And so, you got jealous and you murdered her. Now, 6 days later, thankfully, some progression happens in the case. which is the fact that a man calls and says, I think someone's stealing my neighbor's TV. So the NYPD, they zoot over there. They're like, we gotta go. So they get there and they see this guy putting a TV into the trunk, and it was a white car. And they ask, like, what are you doing? Why are you putting the TV in here? So he's like, oh, I'm a moving company. Like, I have my own moving company and I am helping my neighbor move. So it seems like you're stealing a TV, sir. We gotta bring you into the precinct because this is the craziest crime we've ever heard. How dare you? What kind of evil person are you? And so they bring him into the precinct, and that's when they realize, wait a second, that white car really matches the description of Kitty's murder. A lot of the neighbors said, I just saw a man like run into this white car. It looked like this. And they start asking him, where were you 6 days ago? And he says, oh, I was killing Kitty. Like, he was just like, I was killing someone. Like, he just straight up just confessed to everything, essentially. Like, immediately, he was just emotionless. He was like, yeah, I killed her. It was Winston Mosley, by the way, stealing that TV, as you might have guessed. And he's like, yeah, I was killing someone. I also killed someone a week ago. Her name is Annie Mary Johnson, and I killed her in her own house. I also 2 separate women. I think I might have burglarized at least 20 to, let's just say 30 homes. So that's just been what I've been up to. What about you guys? So he gets put on trial for Kitty's murder, and he tried to plead not guilty by reason of insanity, and the judge and the jury just did not fall for it. They were like, you're not crazy, you're just sick and nasty. So they charged him, they convicted him, he was found guilty, and he died in prison at 81 years old. He had spent close to 52 years in prison, and he is actually one of the longest serving prison inmates in the New York State prison system, because 52 years is a really long time. And that is the real story of Kitty Genovese. So even at the time, a lot of other journalists who didn't work for the New York Times realized that there was a lot of inconsistencies in the story, because these journalists also wanted to cover the Kitty Genovese murder. So they're like trying to get this information, and they're like, wait, this doesn't make sense because the New York Times said this, and obviously we wouldn't think that they would lie to us, but then when I get the police reports, it's saying something else. Now, there was 2 reporters who kept consistently following up on the case, and they decided to call the New York Times editor at the time with the discrepancies, and was like, well, this is what the evidence says, but you wrote like this, right? And he just got so mad and was like, how dare you, and hung up. Now, the New York Times did put out official corrections on this case, but it just looks really bad. Now, in 2019, they redid a study, and this time they did it with CCTV footage of real-life events in the United Kingdom, so that it wasn't set up or staged, because that could always impact things. In 90% of cases, bystanders intervened when someone needed help. But the bystander effect, especially when coupled with Kitty's story, makes it seem like humanity is just a piece of very fascinating. This one was wild, and I can't believe that there are 2 very different stories of this one. The true crime version, but also the psychology version. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.